Some killers don't fear punishment, they fear being forgotten. Behind prison walls, there are men who sharpen silence into blades and carve their names into the living with every body they drop. These 5 didn't kill for power, money, or rage. They killed because it gave them something prison couldn't take: identity, control, memory. Between 1997 and 2020, they turned solitary units, chow halls, and cell blocks into kill zones. Before we dive into their stories, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is, there right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because these monsters weren't hiding from the world. The world was hiding from them. Evander Rook was the kind of prisoner no one remembered arriving, but everyone remembered leaving. 6'3", bone thin, a face like cracked granite, and a whisper voice that cut deeper than most screams. Rook wasn't just a lifer, he was a phantom with paperwork. Convicted of murdering a federal prosecutor, his case was sealed under national security terms. The rumor inside ADX Florence was that Rook had once worked in intelligence, or law enforcement, or both. But the only truth that survived the noise was this: he killed with water. The first body came 3 months after his transfer to D Unit. A white-collar inmate doing time for insider trading. Nothing violent, no gang ties. He was found in his cell during morning count, slumped over the sink, lungs filled with water. No wounds, no struggle, just drowned. In a cell with no standing water and a sink too shallow to submerge a face. The report ruled it as suicide, but inside the unit, inmates whispered a name: Rook. The man had been talking too much, bragging about who he knew, what he'd done, what secrets were still buried out in the world. One guard overheard him mention a nobody cellmate who always stares at the pipes. 2 days later, he was dead. When questioned, Rook said nothing, just sat calmly, tapping his fingers on the metal desk like a courtroom rhythm. And that was the beginning. Rook's weapon was never made of steel or fire. It was time, patience, and water. He studied the plumbing system inside ADX with obsession, learned the flow pressure, the return cycles, even how to manipulate pipe volume by blocking specific drainage routes with wads of wet socks. He'd collect data in notebooks made from toilet paper and soap carvings, creating maps of pressure points. He knew when the water surged, when it died, when it backed up, and once he had that knowledge, he became what he always believed he was: a judge. Not in a courtroom, in a cell block. And every inmate he chose to sentence drowned. The second body came 5 weeks later. A gang member transferred from USP Coleman after a failed hit, who'd made the mistake of extorting another inmate for commissary. The victim went to Rook, not for help, but because they shared a pipe system and the man couldn't sleep through the noise. Rook listened, asked no questions. The next morning, the gang member was found dead, again slumped over the sink, lungs filled with fluid. Again, no sign of a struggle. The sink had been rigged, plugged tight with a bar of soap, the overflow valve silently sealed with a mix of ramen powder and toothpaste. It created a slow rise, and when the pressure was adjusted through the shared pipe system, it flooded silently back through the neighboring sink during lights out. No one saw a thing. When guards checked Rook's cell, everything was dry. He hadn't moved, but written in the fog on his mirror, only visible under a blacklight during forensic testing, were 3 words: sentence carried out. From that moment on, Rook stopped being just another inmate. He became myth. Inmates began noticing strange occurrences: water pressure shifting during night hours, faucets spitting steam, toilets that didn't flush for 15-minute intervals. One man claimed Rook could speak to the pipes, warning people days before a target would die by telling them the water's rising. Whether it was paranoia or ritual, it worked. The unit became hushed, movement slowed, inmates checked their sinks every night. One man even ripped his faucet off with a boot heel just to sleep in peace. But Rook didn't need to threaten. His kills came slow, months apart, always during transfers, always just after someone bragged, lied, or threatened the weak. He saw himself not as a murderer, but a correction. "The system ends here," he once wrote in a grievance form, unsigned, left folded in a vent. That paper was found 2 days after a man was discovered face first in the toilet, with no signs of restraint, lungs bloated and throat filled with scalding water. No fingerprints, no tool marks, just another whisper. Rook had found a way to turn water into judgment. By the time Evander Rook's third victim was found, face down in a flood-soaked cell, wrists untied, mouth filled with soggy notebook paper, the guards began to understand something terrifying. They weren't watching a killer. They were witnessing a doctrine unfold. The dead man had been a former corrupt CO turned inmate, serving time for sex trafficking and bribery. Word around the block was that he'd been writing letters to the warden, offering to inform on gang activities in exchange for better housing. He was seen by other inmates as a snitch. Rook didn't ask questions. He didn't confront him. But 3 days before the man's death, a folded sheet of paper was slid under his cell door. No one saw who delivered it. Inside was a single sentence: "The court rejects your plea." That night, during a brief plumbing malfunction in the south end of the unit, the victim's sink backed up rapidly, overflowing at a rate the system never should have allowed. The toilet surged twice. By morning, the man was floating, face down, his mouth stuffed with wet paper like a gag. The cameras captured no activity. Rook's door had never opened. His hands were dry. But in his cell, taped beneath the steel sink, was a line carved into the wall: "Verdict enforced." From that point forward, ADX Florence stopped trying to prosecute Rook. They knew better. They treated him not like a threat, but like a ritual. The prison installed backflow valves, reinforced the pipes, limited his water access. And yet, the fourth body came. This time, a former neo-Nazi enforcer who had fallen from grace, stripped of power, abandoned by his crew. He'd begun begging for commissary, threatening weaker inmates for scraps, using fear to stay relevant. But he was no longer feared, just pitied. Until Rook decided his time was up. That week, inmates reported hearing strange pipe groans at night, different from the usual building shifts, like something was being rerouted. When the man was found, the autopsy showed burns to the throat and lungs. He had drowned, but not in regular water. The fluid contained trace chemicals from the industrial boiler line used to heat staff rooms. Somehow, Rook had manipulated the backflow system to route superheated liquid into the target's sink, causing it to gush upward during sleep rotation. The man awoke gagging, couldn't escape the stream, and died scalded from the inside out. His lips were fused shut from the heat. The boiler access was 2 floors away, no connection to his cell. But when maintenance traced the path of the pipe system, they found 3 missing valve caps, stored neatly inside the duct above Rook's toilet. Clean, dry, numbered, and tagged with surgical labels. When confronted, Rook only said one thing: he had no appeal left. At that point, the prison didn't just fear Rook. They changed for him. Staff refused to assign new inmates to adjoining cells. Maintenance crews avoided his unit unless escorted. Guards stopped addressing him directly. A protocol was developed for handling his space: visual-only cell inspections, zero contact feeding, and no placement near medical risk inmates. But Rook had already achieved what he wanted. He didn't need to kill anymore. His name did it for him. Still, one more execution would come. The final one. The only one that broke the system entirely. This time, it wasn't a targeted snitch. It was a leader, Marcus June Elkins, a gang boss known for controlling the narcotics flow in 3 different penitentiaries. He had allies, reach, and protection, but he also had a temper. And when he assaulted a mentally ill inmate during chapel for refusing to hand over a Bible, Rook decided judgment was due. Unlike the others, Rook didn't use stealth. He filed a grievance, a real one, official. The form read, "Conduct witnessed, punishment pending." When Elkins heard about it, he laughed, said out loud, "What's that old creep gonna do? Throw a pipe at me?" The laughter didn't last. 3 nights later, after a power dip caused a reset in the security panel, a sudden scream was heard through the tier. By the time guards arrived, Elkins was convulsing in his cell. The floor flooded, steam rising from the sink drain. His throat was burnt, tongue split, chest blistered from inhaling scalding fluid. But what stunned investigators wasn't the scene, it was the message, written in condensation on the inside of the observation window. Court adjourned. They searched Rook's cell top to bottom. No tools, no contraband. Not even a sink. His water line had been disabled 2 weeks earlier, and yet somehow he'd done it again. The decision was made the next morning. Rook would be moved to no-contact containment, a modified storage room repurposed as a human box. No plumbing, no window, no metal, just air and time. But when they arrived to remove him, Rook was gone. Cell locked, no signs of escape. The air vent screws were untouched. His mattress undisturbed. No cameras saw him leave. The only clue left behind was a folded paper beneath his pillow, a courtroom verdict form stolen years earlier from the prison legal library, with one box checked in red ink. Sentence completed. No one has seen Evander Rook since. Theories range from a bureaucratic transfer to a suicide vanished by staff. But those who lived with him, those who heard the pipes groan and the verdicts echo, they don't believe he's dead. They believe he's waiting, somewhere deep in the system, listening, watching. Because Rook didn't kill for power, he killed for balance. And every now and then, in certain cell blocks, inmates swear the pressure in their sink still shifts without warning, like someone is building a case. But if Rook judged from the shadows, the next man made his verdicts public. He didn't kill for silence. He killed to send a message. And each body he left behind wasn't just a corpse. It was a warning. His name was Warren Slate. Warren Slate never wanted control behind closed doors. He wanted you to see it, feel it, smell it burning in the air before you ever found the body. He didn't kill for silence. He killed for spectacle. Born in Shreveport and raised in group homes, Slate spent his childhood bouncing between violence and invisibility. Stabbed by his foster brother at 12, arrested at 14, ignored by every system until he made the kind of noise they couldn't turn away from. His first kill was at 17, a gas station clerk he beat to death with a crowbar in full view of a security camera, just to prove that nothing would stop him. At trial, he refused counsel and screamed through sentencing, demanding maximum time. "You don't cage monsters," he told the judge. "You watch them." He was sent to Angola, Louisiana's largest and most brutal penitentiary, and within weeks, he made good on his promise. Slate wasn't interested in status when he arrived. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't join a car. What he did was learn who mattered, and then kill someone they loved. His first prison hit was on a shot caller's brother, a soft-spoken man doing 5 years for grand theft. Slate didn't wait for permission. He beat the man to death in the kitchen with a mop handle, then dragged the body into the hallway and lit his mattress on fire. As the flames caught, Slate dipped his hands in the victim's blood and wrote, "Pay me first," across the concrete wall. It was the first of what the inmates would come to call his message scenes. That wasn't just an attack. That was a declaration. And it worked. Word spread through Angola like electricity. This wasn't someone trying to climb. It was someone trying to terrify. Slate refused to play the old games, politics, racial divisions, hierarchy. He wanted to control not through alliance, but by daring the entire system to retaliate. And when they didn't, It made him hungrier. His second murder happened during count. He'd learned the exact moment when guards scanned Tier 2, how long their eyes stayed down when they marked roll, and how many seconds passed before they walked off. Slate approached his target, a man known for loan sharking and extorting sex from weaker inmates, and offered him a peanut butter packet. When the man reached for it, Slate drove a toothbrush shank through the man's temple, twisted, then sat back down. When the guards returned, Slate held out the bloody weapon and said, "I'm redecorating." But it wasn't over. That night, when officers entered his cell, they found his mattress carved with a razor. Try again. No one knew what it meant, until 2 days later, a second inmate on that tier was found beaten to death in the rec yard with a crushed jaw and a note taped to his chest that read, "He watched." Suddenly, they understood. Slate wasn't just killing the guilty, he was killing the silent. Anyone who let violence happen and turned away was just as guilty in his eyes. His war wasn't on people, it was on passivity. From there, the system tried to suppress him. They moved him to restrictive housing, stripped his cell, removed his books, denied him mail. Slate responded by carving messages into his own skin. On his chest, "Words live." Across his forearm, "Close your eyes, I'll close your throat." Every time he killed, he left a sentence, written in blood, scratched into metal, drawn with ketchup or dirt or ash. Sometimes cryptic, sometimes loud. One victim was found inside a locked supply closet with the words, "He smiled at a child killer," scrawled above him in mustard. No one knew what it meant, but everyone understood the danger. Slate had turned every murder into a canvas. He was part serial killer, part artist, part prophet, a man who didn't see himself as an inmate, but as a message delivery system. And when one of his messages wasn't received properly, he delivered it again, louder, messier, closer to someone important. The guards began calling him the printer because of how mechanically he produced fear. Every new body was a bulletin, and nobody, not even staff, felt safe reading them. By his third kill, Warren Slate wasn't just feared, he was studied. The Department of Corrections had psychiatrists reviewing his messages, cryptographers analyzing the patterns in his phrasing, and regional wardens trading files to find common ground. They never did. Slate's method wasn't repetition, it was escalation. Each murder wasn't just an act, it was a headline, a ritual, a declaration designed to sink into the minds of the men who read about it, walked past the scene, or cleaned the blood off the walls. Slate knew the prison watched him, and so he made sure it never stopped. His most infamous kill came during a 3-day lockdown following a riot. The prison was on edge. The power was being run on generators, and every tier was being fed on emergency rations. Slate used the tension as fuel. He began pacing, refusing food, whispering phrases to himself just loud enough for nearby inmates to catch fragments. He laughed, "So he dies. Everyone will know." No one knew who he was talking about, but they all knew what was coming. He requested toilet paper and Kool-Aid packets from a guard, claiming digestive issues. The guard, tired and understaffed, complied. With those ingredients, Slate made ink. With ink, he made signs. On the third day, the power flickered and the cell blocks plunged into partial darkness. When it returned, the guards performed a standard visual sweep. That's when they found the body, hung by a noose made from laundry netting, one arm missing, the eye sockets gouged out and filled with peanut butter. The torso had been branded with a heating coil, left on the victim's mattress the day before, and over his chest, carved deep into the flesh, were the words, "He whistled." What made it worse wasn't the violence, it was the design. Slate had turned the body into a billboard. The arm was left on the floor, fingers curled around a hand-rolled cigarette. The walls were painted in Kool-Aid ink with 6-foot-tall letters, "Look what happens." The victim, a mid-tier gang affiliate, had been accused, quietly, of watching a minor get assaulted in the showers months earlier and doing nothing. No one ever proved it, but someone told Slate, and that was enough. The message was brutal and direct. The staff were horrified. They'd assumed Slate couldn't strike during lockdown. They were wrong. He had planned every moment. The murder had happened during the generator transition, when all cameras lost power for 62 seconds. That was all he needed. When they dragged him from the cell, he didn't fight. He held out his hands, looked directly into the captain's eyes and said, "Message sent." That kill broke the tier. No one wanted to be housed near Slate. Inmates transferred voluntarily to lower status blocks just to avoid eye contact. Staff stopped referring to him by name. They used codes. Unit Echo 7, Cell 9. He was placed in extreme isolation, a cell with no objects, no windows, and no corners, the kind used for inmates at risk of suicide or systemic sabotage. But even there, Slate found ways to speak. He scratched messages into his skin with his own fingernails. He hummed the same two-note tune every night for 4 hours until guards begged for reassignment. He wrote invisible ink letters using diluted soap and condensation, discovered only when one of his messages accidentally appeared in the fog of a nighttime inspection. "I'm not the problem, you are." The warden declared Slate a psychological biohazard, a term never used before or since, and ordered a full teardown of the block. They removed every inmate from Tier E, scrubbed the walls, changed the cell numbers, burned Slate's mattress, and rotated every guard off the unit. But they still couldn't shake the presence. Weeks later, during a new inmate orientation, a man was found unconscious in the shower with the word "should have spoken" drawn in dust on the mirror. Slate had been in full isolation for 41 days. No contact. No objects, no way to reach anyone, and yet his message arrived. Eventually, the prison did something unprecedented. They blackboxed him, not just in solitary, but in records. They stripped his name from the public system, reassigned his ID number, logged him as non-verbal high-threat unit. His mail was stopped, his visits blocked, but the legend stayed. Inmates in Angola still talk about him in code. That guy who makes signs. They say if you hear humming in the walls, stop talking, don't look, don't laugh. Because Slate didn't care who you were, he cared what you ignored. And if your silence echoed just a little too long, he made sure your blood screamed for you. His body count officially stopped at 5, but his influence didn't. He wasn't killing for power, he was killing to warn. And sometimes, warnings don't disappear. They wait, in the walls, in the rules, in the fear that someone is still watching. Because Warren Slate didn't leave messages on paper, he carved them into memory. But while Slate turned corpses into billboards, the next man made sure his kills left nothing behind. No blood, no body, no sound. He was a cleaner, a surgeon of vengeance. And when your name made his list, you vanished without a trace. They called him Derek Voss. Derek Voss was never loud. He didn't pick fights, raise his voice, or play the prison politics game. He moved with discipline, ate alone, and didn't flinch when threats came his way. At first glance, he looked like a nobody, medium height, wiry build, balding at 42. But anyone who spent more than a minute near him knew better. There was something too still about him, something too calculated. Voss had done 10 years in the Navy before being dishonorably discharged and disappearing off the grid. When he resurfaced, it was after a series of precision murders. Men found dead in hotel bathrooms, drug houses, abandoned storage units. Every one of them connected to a federal witness list. Voss was arrested during a federal sting, convicted of 3 murders, and sent to Marion Correctional Institution. But prison didn't change him. It clarified him. He didn't speak during intake. He memorized guard rotations within a week. He walked the yard not like a man trapped, but like one mapping exits. And most of all, he observed. He watched everything. Who owed what? Who disrespected whom? Who got loud when eyes were turned? His first kill came 4 months in. The victim was a loudmouth, Randall Trigger Polk, a low-level brawler who liked humiliating mentally ill inmates and stealing trays. Trigger wasn't smart, but he was vicious, and he made the mistake of cornering a fragile inmate in the showers, cutting his hand with a razor comb and laughing about it afterward. Voss didn't react, didn't comfort the victim. He just sat there, staring at Trigger's table during chow, watching, waiting. He spent 10 days preparing the kill, not with weapons, with information. He mapped Trigger's movement, cell, rec, showers, when he left, when he returned. Most importantly, Voss studied his breathing, how fast he walked, how often he coughed. He was searching for weakness, physical rhythm, and he found it. Trigger had a shoulder injury, left side, that made him stretch every time he reached the upper tier. That stretch gave Voss his entry point. The plan was built around surgical timing. He collected the foil from cigarette packs and flattened it behind his bunk, sharpening it with melted Vaseline and concrete grit. The final product was a narrow sliver of metal, less than 5 inches long, thin as a bookmark. He sewed it into the waistband of his boxers, using dental floss and precise stitching so it would lie flat. Then he waited. On a Wednesday night, as inmates returned from the yard, Voss took the long route through the shower corridor, timed perfectly with Trigger's stretch near the stairwell. As Trigger turned his back to reach for the rail, Voss walked past, slid the blade across his throat in a precise upward diagonal from carotid to jaw, and kept walking. No scream, no stumble. Trigger kept moving for 3 steps before collapsing, blood spilling from his neck in a line as clean as if drawn with a ruler. The wound was so surgical that the first 2 guards thought it was a fall injury. By the time medical arrived, the body was cooling. Voss was already on his bunk, reading. There were no prints, no witnesses. The cameras caught nothing but shadows. The autopsy showed the blade missed bone entirely, an expert cut, and the cause of death was ruled targeted laceration of the carotid artery, unknown weapon. When questioned, Voss said 5 words. "I was on my bunk." That was the truth. At the time, the body dropped. The investigation turned up nothing. Trigger had no major enemies, no gang debts, just a history of cruelty that had finally found its cost. And Voss, he went back to routine. But now, men watched him differently. He wasn't feared because of what he did. He was feared because of what he left behind. Nothing. No mess. No motive. No trace. A man like that didn't just kill. He deleted. And from that moment forward, Derek Voss wasn't just another inmate. He was a surgeon with a scalpel made of time. Derek Voss never made the same move twice. After Trigger Polk's clean removal, he became even quieter, as if purging the man had released tension, not created it. He returned to his bunk, his workouts, his habit of folding socks with military precision. To most, it looked like the storm had passed. But inside, Voss had already chosen his second subject. Not a predator this time, but a manipulator. Franklin Delwyn, better known as Preacher, a Bible thumper with a gift for guilt and a hidden habit of exploiting desperation. He offered legal advice in exchange for favors, sexual, financial, even physical protection, and he preyed on the confused. To the guards, he was a blessing, ran prayer circles, quoted scripture during inspections. But Voss saw what he really was, a parasite with robes. It wasn't just that Preacher was vile. It was that he thought he was clean. That smug grin when someone thanked him for helping, the way he touched shoulders like a shepherd. Voss watched. Not his movements this time, but his influence, who he talked to, who looked up to him. and how that could be turned back against him. Because this time, Voss didn't want to kill with a blade. He wanted to prove that you could kill someone by pulling a single thread. He started small. Notes. Left in preacher's bunk. Just hints. We know. He cries when you walk away. Tell them what you did. Then he moved to framing. Voss used crushed soap dust to mimic drugs, wrapped in paper with preacher's name scrawled in it, and planted it under a cell toilet, someone else's. When the guards found it, the unit erupted in suspicion. Preacher denied everything. But seeds don't need water when paranoia is already boiling. Voss leaned in further. He manipulated the men preacher trusted, casually offering them items, making soft threats about what he heard in the tier. One of them, an unstable inmate named Rory, began sleep-talking about betrayal. Another, a new intake who didn't understand the game yet, was randomly sent a kite, forged by Voss, warning him not to talk to preacher if he wanted to survive the week. The pressure built like a vice. Whispers circled the block. Preacher stopped holding prayer meetings. Guards noticed his hands shaking during count. He requested a transfer, denied. Then one night, a riot drill went off. The lights cut, doors slammed. Everything stopped for 20 seconds. When they came back up, preacher was on the floor in the chapel, bleeding from both ears, eyes rolled back, foaming at the mouth. No signs of assault, no wounds, no poison, nothing. He was dead before medics arrived. Official cause of death: cardiac arrest from an acute stress reaction. Unofficial cause of death: Derek Voss. The entire chain of events, from whispers to collapse, had taken 23 days. Voss had never touched the man, never entered his cell, but he'd pulled every thread, rewired every perception, and created an environment so charged, so mentally claustrophobic, that preacher's own body had given out. In the investigative summary, one CO wrote, "There is no proof Voss caused this, but everyone on this block knows he did." That line never made it into the official report, but it made it into policy. Voss was now considered a psychological weapon, not just a killer, but an operator, a man who could destabilize a tier without breaking a single rule. The prison moved him to restricted custody level 5. No group contact, no commissary, no paper. His books were swapped every 72 hours to prevent note passing. His light stayed on 24/7, but the effect lingered. 2 months after Voss was transferred, an inmate in his former block attacked another during prayer, screaming, "I know what he told you." A new protocol was drafted for high-risk inmates with nonviolent behavioral markers. They named it the Voss Protocol, and even in his cage, Voss smiled, because control wasn't about making noise. It was about pulling strings no one else could see. They say he stopped killing after preacher, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to anymore. Every death from that point forward was credited to his name, whether he'd touched it or not. A suicide in the showers? Voss must have whispered something. A guard found crying in his car? Voss had stared too long. He became the explanation for everything the system didn't want to admit. That fear could be manufactured without violence. That a man could become a shadow on the walls and never raise a hand. To this day, Derek Voss is still alive, housed in a subterranean containment unit used for prisoners deemed unfit for general human housing. He hasn't spoken a word in 7 years, but once during a routine cell cleaning, a guard found something scratched into the floor beneath his bed frame. 4 words, barely legible, etched with a paperclip melted flat. "I only move thoughts." And for Voss, that was enough. He didn't need a knife. He didn't need fire. He just needed you to believe he was already inside your head. But if Voss was silent and strategic, the next man was loud and sudden. His rage didn't simmer. It detonated. One insult, one mistake. That's all it took for the animal to come out. He didn't stalk. He struck. and left nothing standing. His name was Raymond "Bricks" Clay. Raymond Clay wasn't built like a man. He was built like punishment. 6'7", 296 pounds of scarred muscle and rage, with fists that looked like butcher's blocks and a stare that cut through plexiglass. Born in Birmingham and raised in the back alleys of Columbia, South Carolina, Clay earned the nickname Bricks before he turned 16, not for throwing them, but for beating a rival gang member with one until the boy's face was unrecognizable. He wasn't driven by money or turf. He was driven by reaction, the flinch, the fear. That look someone gave him when they realized he wasn't bluffing. His rap sheet was longer than most short stories. Aggravated assault, attempted murder, felony battery, but it was the triple homicide in a prison brawl that got him life without parole. He was 22 when they sent him to McCormick Correctional, a facility already drowning in violence, where gang lines ran deeper than concrete cracks. But even there, Bricks was different. He didn't align, didn't fold, didn't even speak for the first 6 months. He just worked out, hours a day, pushing his body into something less human and more mythic. The guards tried to box him in early. One provoked him in the chow line, and Bricks responded by driving the man's face into the metal counter and snapping his radius bone with a twist. That sent a message, not to the inmates, but to the staff. From that point forward, Clay walked the tiers like a ghost with boots. Every step sounded like it carried a promise. His first inmate kill happened in plain sight. A young blood named Dante "Mouse" Jenkins had been bragging about robbing a rival's commissary. What he didn't know was that the rival was Bricks's younger cousin. Clay didn't shout, didn't warn. He waited until yard time, when everyone was out in the sun, tensions simmering but faces calm, and then walked straight toward Mouse with no shirt, no hesitation. When Mouse saw him coming, he tried to back up. Bricks didn't stop. He slammed Mouse to the ground so hard the boy's head bounced. Then came the fists. 10, 12, 20. Each one echoed across the yard like gunshots. Mouse didn't scream. He couldn't. His jaw had broken on the third hit. Guards charged in, but Bricks stood up before they reached him, blood dripping from his knuckles, chest heaving like a bull. And then he smiled, wide, calm, as if he'd just finished a workout. They threw him in solitary for 3 months. He didn't flinch. He spent the time doing push-ups, wall sits, and carving names into the concrete with a spoon. When he came out, he was bigger, meaner, and now he had a reputation. Not a clever killer, not a schemer, but a destroyer. The kind of man who didn't leave bodies behind. He left warnings. The prison thought containment would dull him. It didn't. He killed again during a fire drill, using the chaos to grab another inmate by the collar and throw him from the upper tier like trash. The man's neck snapped on impact. Bricks said nothing, no note, no motive, just that same smile. His kills were spontaneous, but never careless. He picked moments when chaos gave him cover, and targets who had either betrayed him, laughed at weakness, or simply stood too close when the wrong name was mentioned. He wasn't just reacting, he was sculpting dominance with fists and timing. The cameras caught everything, but it didn't matter. By the time a CO arrived, it was always over. Just a body and Bricks, standing still, unbothered. He once whispered to a rookie CO during strip search, "The cameras don't stop fear, they just record it." Nobody laughed. Clay didn't clean up after himself. He didn't need to, because his message was in the mess. Every kill was a reminder that McCormick didn't belong to gangs or staff. It belonged to him, the kind of man who used bare hands as weapons, who cracked skulls like drywall, and who never blinked when the lights came on. He wasn't playing chess. He was flipping the board every time someone made a move. And the sound that followed? Bones shattering like sirens. Bricks didn't believe in forgiveness. He believed in waiting. And sometimes, his revenge aged like concrete, slow to set, impossible to crack. 6 years after his second confirmed kill, he was still roaming McCormick like a silent executioner, rarely speaking, always watching. Guards joked that he could smell fear through brick walls. Inmates stopped making eye contact when his shadow hit their feet. But there was one man who'd slipped past him all those years, Russell "Snaps" Dillard. Back in county, Snaps had set Bricks up on a weapons charge to shave time off his own sentence. The result? Bricks lost parole, got transferred to McCormick, and earned a reputation he never asked for. The beast they couldn't leash. But Snaps? He disappeared into the system, riding protective custody until the papers stopped mentioning his name. Bricks never forgot. He waited, tracked, until one day, Snaps was quietly transferred to general population, thinking time had erased the blood debt. He was wrong. Bricks didn't act fast. He waited 5 months. Let Snaps get comfortable. Let the guards forget the connection. Let the tears settle into a lie that both men had moved on. Then, one humid Thursday afternoon, Bricks entered the prison gym. He wasn't there to lift. He was there to erase. Snaps had been bench pressing alone, one spotter nearby, headphones in, eyes shut. Bricks walked straight toward the free weights, picked up a 45-pound steel bar, the kind used for curls, and didn't run, didn't shout, didn't smile. He brought it down in one clean arc onto the back of Snaps's neck, full weight behind it. The sound was a wet crunch, like fruit cracking under a boot. Snaps didn't scream. He spasmed once, twice, and then stopped breathing. The spotter stood frozen. But Bricks wasn't finished. He slammed the bar down again, this time on the base of the skull, then hurled it across the room like trash. The entire gym fell silent. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. And then Bricks shouted, loud enough for the walls to remember, he shouldn't have lied. That was the signal. In that instant, 2 other inmates, not gang, not friends, just men who knew the code, flipped benches, threw dumbbells, and tackled COs. The room erupted, a controlled riot, noise, motion, blood. And Bricks? He stepped back, hands raised as if to surrender. When guards swarmed in, they saw a war zone, not a murder. Bricks was cuffed, shoved to the wall, screaming that he was just working out. The bar, lost in the scramble. The cameras, obscured by overturned equipment and smoke grenades. The official report blamed group altercation, cause of death, blunt force trauma from an unidentified object. The body, unrecognizable from facial fractures. Bricks, back in solitary, no charge, no witnesses. No one wanted to be the man who snitched, not in a world where Bricks remembered things 6 years at a time. After that, McCormick changed. COs refused to run the gym without full squads. Inmates whispered about a list, names Bricks had carved into his mind, just waiting for time and opportunity. He didn't need shanks or tricks. He was the weapon. A man who could turn any object into execution, any crowd into camouflage. When a new warden was appointed, his first act was to issue a directive. Don't provoke Clay. Don't talk to Clay. Don't forget who Clay is. That order was written in red ink, because Raymond Clay didn't kill like a monster. He killed like a lesson, one body at a time, loud enough for the system to hear, loud enough for silence to follow. But while Bricks ruled through power, the last man ruled through presence. He didn't strike often. He didn't need to. His calm was the sharpest threat of all, because every time someone crossed him, they vanished. Not in public, but behind locked doors where no cameras worked and no noise ever came out. They called him Luther Haynes, the man in the silence. Luther Haynes was not the kind of killer you saw coming. You didn't hear him shout. You didn't see him fight. You didn't even know he hated you until your body was discovered with nothing broken but your will. He was transferred into Florence ADX under a cloud of paperwork that told only half the truth. Multiple murders, psychiatric history, total lockdown status. But what the documents couldn't explain was why guards rotated out faster on Luther's wing than anywhere else, or why inmates with full behavioral clearance refused to speak if his name came up. Luther didn't belong in population. He lived in a cell buried beneath concrete and steel, where doors didn't open with keys, but with multi-point codes and fingerprint scans. And yet somehow, bodies still turned up dead, always in their own cells, no signs of forced entry, no camera footage, just the same pattern, dead eyes, broken spirit, and one thing missing from each scene: noise. No struggle, no call for help, no alert, just silence. He didn't kill with objects, he killed with time, with air, with presence. The first victim was a man named Foley, ex-enforcer for a biker gang. The kind of man who once bit off another inmate's ear for looking at his food tray. Foley wasn't scared of anyone, until Luther moved into the cell next to him. At first, it was small. Haynes would sit by the vent and whisper for hours, just loud enough for Foley to hear but never understand. Words that weren't quite threats, just fragments. "You still there? Does the light flicker for you too? I think I heard your mother's voice last night," Foley yelled back, banged on the walls, filed reports. But nothing changed. The guard said the noise couldn't be confirmed. Luther would sit there during checks, calm, silent, eyes half-lidded like a monk. After 3 weeks, Foley stopped yelling. Then he stopped speaking. Then one morning, during breakfast rounds, he was found lying on the floor, jaw shattered, blood on his pillow, fingers broken inward as if he'd punched something that wouldn't move. The official ruling was self-harm during mental distress. But the block knew better. Luther never touched him. He just unmade him. Quietly. Thoroughly. It wasn't physical force. It was erosion. Like dripping water, hollowing out stone. His next kill was a cartel fixer named Alvarez, locked 3 doors down. Alvarez was smart. Didn't talk much. Had influence even behind walls. But he made the mistake of bribing a CO to get Luther moved. Wanted his block clean. "Too many ghosts," he said. A week later, Alvarez was dead. 2 ribs punctured, heart failure, blood vessels collapsed from the inside. No fight, no sound, no tool, just gone. That's when staff started rotating out, not from fear of violence, but from fear of what they couldn't explain. No man should be able to kill from behind a locked door, but Luther did, and he always left the same sign: nothing. Haynes had no allies, no visitors, no patterns. His meals went untouched. His books came back with pages torn out in symmetrical patterns. His bed was never used. He slept standing, leaning against the wall like a statue. When the psychiatrist asked why, he whispered, "Beds are for dreamers. I already woke up." They moved him deeper underground, a sealed isolation pod 2 levels below admin. Still, 1 month later, a prison chaplain assigned to Luther's psychological file was found dead in the records room, neck twisted, tongue missing. Luther had no access, no clearance, no motive. But in the corner of the crime scene was a torn page from one of Luther's confiscated books. That's when the facility stopped documenting his name publicly. Guards referred to him as Echo, a sound that never existed, but everyone feared. He wasn't shackled during transfers. He wasn't sedated, because Luther didn't resist. He just walked, hands down, eyes forward, always 1 step ahead of where people thought he would be. He didn't need violence, because the real weapon was belief. Once you started fearing him, he had already won, and the only thing louder than what he did was how little he left behind. By 2010, Luther Haynes had become more of a myth than a man, a presence etched into the foundation of Florence ADX like mold in the stone. Quiet, invisible, impossible to clean. Nobody knew how many men had truly died by his hand, because half of them never showed signs of struggle. No weapon, no trauma, just total shutdown. Like the soul had been extracted and the body didn't know how to keep going. He hadn't spoken to another inmate in years, yet his name still made new prisoners lower their voices. Guards avoided eye contact, chaplains refused his file, and even internal psychology staff requested reassignment after their sessions with him. One therapist broke down crying in the hallway after Luther whispered something in her ear she wouldn't repeat, not even in writing. Whatever grip this man had on the human mind, it wasn't theatrical, it was surgical, precise. One by one, those who tried to dissect him began unraveling themselves instead. But the final chapter came not with a scream, but with a silence so deliberate, so orchestrated, that the prison itself changed the rules. In early 2011, Luther was placed in Tier Black, an experimental isolation wing designed for the worst of the worst. One inmate per hallway, lights 24/7, no contact, no gym, no yard, no mail. A place so dead that even echoes got lost. His new neighbor, Arthur Kelman, a former white-collar hacker turned state witness who sold out a private prison kickback ring. He wasn't a killer, he wasn't a fighter, but he was useful to someone, somewhere. The Bureau placed him on Tier Black, thinking it was the safest place on Earth. That decision killed him. Kelman's death didn't come suddenly. It started with sound. A whisper through vents, a pattern of knocks, a flicker in the light bulb outside his door. He reported it immediately, said he felt watched. Guards checked Luther's logs. No movement, no sound, nothing. But still, Kelman changed. He stopped showering, stopped sleeping, spent 12 hours pacing, muttering numbers under his breath. One CO testified later that Kelman had carved a tic-tac-toe board into his own thigh with a spoon. And then, on April 3rd, the cameras showed Kelman simply sitting down, blinking at the wall, and stopping. His heart didn't fail. He didn't choke. He just quit. The coroner wrote psychogenic death. No cause, no drugs, no trauma, just surrender. Guards reviewing the footage noticed something chilling. In the 15 seconds before Kelman sat down, Luther turned to face the wall they shared and didn't blink once. No noise, no movement, just stillness, like he was looking through 6 inches of reinforced steel and concrete directly into Kelman's soul. And then, as if on cue, Kelman's body failed. That was the last death. Because what happened next broke the system. 3 days after Kelman's body was removed, Luther was scheduled for routine psych evaluation. When guards entered Tier Black with retinal scanners and electronic keys, they found something impossible. His cell door had never been opened. The logs showed no override. The bolts were still engaged. The biometric scanner hadn't tripped once. But the cell was empty, not escaped, empty, as if he had evaporated. On the far wall, etched perfectly into the steel with what appeared to be the sharpened handle of a metal spoon, was one line: "I left before I arrived." The cameras showed nothing, no flicker, no tampering. Just 12 hours of an empty cell and a line that hadn't been there during the last check. The prison went into lockdown for 72 hours. Drones, dogs, heat sensors, all deployed. No signs, no prints, no blood, nothing. After that, Tier Black was shut down permanently. Florence ADX removed the wing from blueprints. COs who'd worked the shift were reassigned, sworn to NDAs. And Luther Haynes' name redacted from every document post-2011. Even his intake file was overwritten with a blank record, as if he had never existed. But inmates still whisper. They say if you're locked alone long enough, you'll hear him in the air vents, saying your name, counting backward. And if you respond, even once, he finds you. Not with fists, not with blades, but with stillness, with dread, with the kind of silence that drains your will to keep breathing. Because Luther Haynes wasn't a killer like the others. He was a vacuum, a void in the system. And when he left, the system didn't collapse. It simply held its breath, hoping he never comes back. 5 men, 5 prisons, and not one of their victims ever made it past the gates alive. Because sometimes the most dangerous killers are already locked inside.